As long as they allow me to create content over at RotoBaller, I'm going to focus my attention on Mike Evans' watch. Yes, in Week 13, Evans would finish with 118 receiving yards on 8 receptions, keeping his 11th straight 1,000-yard season well within reach. With 5 games remaining, Evans is currently sitting on 521 yards. That's 479 yards shy of keeping the streak alive. And I mention this because incentives matter, records matter, and fantasy managers who recognize this are ahead of the curve. With Evans needing to average 95.8 receiving yards the rest of the season, expect Baker Mayfield to continue to feed the future Hall of Famer. So we know that Evans is going to be a must-start from this point on. That's great. However, with Zay Flowers, Cortland Sutton, Nico Collins, Michael Pittman Jr., Terry McLaurin, and yes, Pat Douglas out of action for Week 14 due to the bye, we need some starts and sits here when it matters the most. That's why we're here, so let's punch those tickets to the fantasy postseason with RotoBaller's Week 14 starts and sits at the wide receiver position. And we're going to kick things off with DeAndre Hopkins of the Kansas City Chiefs as they take on the Los Angeles Chargers. After watching Drake London catch 9 balls for 86 yards and watching Ray McLeod haul in another 4 passes for 95 yards against his Chargers secondary last week, you know I feel good about DeAndre Hopkins' chances to make a fantasy impact this week. Now, Los Angeles, they have been one of the best scoring defenses this season. Make no mistake about that. However, over the last 4 weeks, they have generously donated 7 receiving touchdowns to receivers, along with 711 receiving yards. That's 41.78 fantasy points per game that they are allowing over that stretch, which is the second most, trailing only Atlanta Falcons. So I think Hopkins has found himself a secret Santa. Last week against the Raiders, Hopkins ran a route on 65% of the Chiefs' dropbacks, his highest total since week number 9. With snaps and routes increasing and a favorable matchup this week, expect Hopkins to make a statement here in week 14. Hopkins is averaging 0.25 targets per route run amongst wide receivers with at least 140 routes since week number 8. That sits 20th. Now, another wide receiver I'm putting in my lineup, I'm putting trust back in him, and it's Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans as they take on the Jacksonville Jaguars in a revenge game. Yes, revenge games matter, just like incentives, just like records. I mean, this is one of those things that players get up for. There's money on the board and everything else. Now, are we seeing an NWI invasion in Tennessee? Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, 8 touchdowns on the season, 7 scores in his last 8 games. The only wide receivers with more touchdowns than Westbrook-Ikhine, Jamar Chase, Terry McLaurin, Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's the list right now. NWI, he's kind of bringing down my Calvin Ridley vibes. That and Will Levis's accuracy in recent weeks. Now, back to Calvin Ridley. In that Week 13 contest, Ridley against the Commanders, he caught 2 of his 8 targets for 45 yards. The targets, they're great, but trust me, you don't want to go back on the film and see where those targets were actually landing out there. Now, Ridley, he finished the game with an average depth of target there of 20.3. Only 4 receivers who ran 30 or more routes topped that number. Now, Ridley would also finish with 34.6% air yard share and 122 air yards. Oh, what could have been, people. Now, of those targets there, only three of those 8 targets were deemed catchable. With the volume expected to continue, if Will Levis can deliver a catchable ball, or at least throw it kind of in that vicinity, it is reasonable to suggest that a matchup against the 3rd friendliest defense is going to lead to fantasy production. Not only is this a revenge game for Ridley, but the Jaguars have allowed 2,177 receiving yards, 13 touchdowns, and 38.46 fantasy points per game to wideouts this season. And my 3rd start of the week, it is Ladd McConkey of the Chargers taking on the Chiefs. Listen, McConkey's basically turning himself into his own Monty Python skit, where he's the Black Knight. It doesn't matter if he's got 1 leg or 2 legs or whatever he has, no arms. He's going to find a way to be productive. He entered week number 13 with a leg injury. He caught 9 passes of the 23 balls that Justin Herbert attempted to put out there, accounting for 117 of Herbert's 147 yards passing. And then he suffered another leg injury and kept on playing. If they sit this man in a wheelchair, Gus Edwards is going to line up behind him, push him 10 yards down the field, and Herbert is still going to throw him the ball. In McConkey's last 3 weeks, the rookie has produced 21 receptions on 27 targets that have been thrown in his direction, while turning that volume into 323 receiving yards. In those 3 contests, McConkey has averaged 17.8 fantasy points. That makes him the wide receiver 8 over that 3-game sample. With 117 yards receiving last week, McConkey is on pace to finish with 1,154. Only 7 other rookie receivers have finished a season with more than 1,150 yards. Here's the list. Randy Moss, Michael Clayton, Odell Beckham Jr., Anquan Bolden, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Puka Nacua. Talk about elite company. McConkey is 335 yards shy of joining that Mount Rushmore of rookie wide receivers. While he may not get it all this week, he has an excellent chance to put a sizable dent in the number, as the Chiefs have allowed 662 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns to the position over the last 4 weeks. Now let's talk about wide receivers that we're sitting. Maybe some temper your expectations, maybe some buyer beware, but it starts with Chicago Bears wide receiver DJ Moore as they take on the San Francisco 49ers. Considering his latest run, DJ Moore, he's a difficult sit. I get it. In week 13, Moore saw 16 targets, so why am I sitting this guy? Since Shane Waldron, he's been dismissed there, Moore has averaged 21.4 fantasy points per game. In those 3 games, not only has Moore got the job done, but Keenan Allen's got involved too. 31 targets, 18 receptions, 200 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, this Bears offense is starting to look like an offense. So I get it. With 6 teams on a bye, Moore may not be the guy that you want to be sitting. But saying all that, the San Francisco 49ers have been allowing 24.9 fantasy points per game to the position over the last 4 weeks. That is the 5th fewest. And throughout the season, the 49ers, they sit 9th with just 29.34 fantasy points per game against, having allowed just 129.2 receiving yards per game to oppositional pass catchers and 9 scores through the air to the position. With how this 49ers defense has struggled to defend the run, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears gave DeAndre Swift a few extra touches in this one. Moore, he's still going to be a solid wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, or a flex option moving forward. With Thomas Brown now the interim head coach, Chris Beatty takes over as offensive coordinator duties there, and that's something worth watching because is it going to be the same? Is there going to be an adjustment? Hey, who knows? Can't wait to see how this breaks down. Now, the second wide receiver that I'm sitting, Davante Adams of the New York Jets as they take on the Miami Dolphins down in South Beach. Right now, the Jets, they put fun in the word dysfunctional, people. Since being acquired by the Jets on October 15th, Davante Adams has 344 receiving yards on 31 receptions. That works out to about 57.3 receiving yards per game, or 12.3 yards per game fewer than what he was producing with the Las Vegas Raiders. In 1 fewer game since the deal went down, Jacoby Myers has produced 403 receiving yards, 80.6 yards per game on 34 receptions, including 95 or more receiving yards in 3 of 5 contests, a mark that Adams has yet to reach in New York. Okay, that felt good to get that off my chest, but however, it's time to separate the numbers. While Miami has been susceptible to the pass in recent weeks, they still have a guy in their secondary that goes by the name of Jalen Ramsey, who's still pretty good at football. Through 12 games this season, Miami, they've surrendered just 1,491 receiving yards, 7 touchdown receptions to the wideout position. Add that all up, and you have a defense that's allowing opposing wide receivers just 27.22 fantasy points per game, the second fewest. And finally, I'm sitting Brian Thomas Jr. of the Jacksonville Jaguars against the Tennessee Titan. Azeez Al-Shahir may have shortened Trevor Lawrence's season with that brutal headshot. Now, the good news is Lawrence was able to leave the stadium under his own power. But before Lawrence's untimely exit there, I thought Brian Thomas Jr. was about to remind everybody why he should be considered one of the top wide receivers in the game. Not just one of the top rookie pass catchers, one of the top wide receivers that we have in the NFL today. This season, Thomas is averaging 18.8 fantasy points per game and has accumulated 165.5 fantasy points. That's good enough for the wide receiver 12, but here's the thing. In games in which Lawrence had missed time this season, Thomas is averaging his 10.4 fantasy points per game, and in that week 9 to week 13 period, Thomas, wide receiver 45. So Lawrence's absence is definitely going to be noted here for fantasy managers of Brian Thomas Jr. With Lawrence unlikely to suit up this week, Thomas's fantasy outlook looks a little bleak against a Titans team that has allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers this season. If you want more news and analysis, more breakdowns, head over to RotoBaller.com or head over to the RotoBaller Discord channel where you can find me there every single day of the week answering all your starts and sit questions. See you next time.